luckily we were muted, so that's a good one. Oh, and I don't have... Stand by! I'm a professional streamer.
This is why we can't have nice things.
This is 100% why we can't have nice things. Okay. This is Erin. Hi, Erin. Hi. We are live. Audio appears to be correct. Please let us know if there are any issues on the stream. I appreciate you guys very much for joining us. Erin's a good friend of mine. We've known each other for what?
A few months now.
I was going to say like a year and a half now, because I
didn't meet you until I met Tom, and Tom and I have been dating since December.
Okay, well then I'm full of shit. That's entirely possible as well.
It's been like 9 months.
Okay, well 9 months is still a nice long time, but it's been a pleasure knowing you. Thank you for your service. Erin is a veteran, and I'd like you to just kind of introduce yourself. What service were you in? What branch? And tell us a little bit about the history of your military service.
Yeah, so I was in the Air National Guard, which is the Guard branch of the U.S. Air Force, and I enlisted in 2009. So it was after Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I didn't see a lot of the things that other people saw. Basically, what it came down to is that I grew up in a really abusive home. And after I moved out at 18, and I swore to myself that I wasn't going to have contact with my family anymore because my family wasn't good for me. They weren't supportive. They weren't helpful, and anything they did was incredibly damaging towards me. So I got to a point where I was working a full-time job. I was working a second part-time job, and I was going to school full-time. And that was when I was 19.
Wow.
And, at 19, you kind of think you're invincible and that you can do everything. And I quickly realized that I couldn't, that I wasn't Superwoman, that I wasn't invincible, and that the way I was living wasn't sustainable. So I was faced with a choice. I quit my part-time job, I dropped out of school, and I was working my full-time job, and then I was laid off. And at that time, the full-time job that I had is I was tech support for a Verizon retailer. So I did a lot of work with electronics and cell phones, and at that time, Verizon Fios, the internet service, was brand spanking new. Nobody knew about it. This was in 2008, 2009. And after I got laid off from my job, I had a 2-bedroom apartment that I couldn't afford on my own. And I tried, picking up roommates and stuff like that to help cover expenses, and I just couldn't keep up with it. And it was either join the military or be homeless, because there was no way I was going to go back to my family. Right. So an old friend of mine, when I was 18, cashier at Home Depot, and one of my friends that worked with me at Home Depot, he was stationed in Northern California in the Bay Area at an Air National Guard base. It's Moffett Federal Airfield. And he said, just come down on a drill weekend with me, see what you think. And then while we're down there, if you want to, you can go talk to a recruiter. So I went down there and I met all of his coworkers and his commander and his shop chief and everything. And I was like, this is really cool. I really like the vibe. Let's talk to a recruiter. And that day I took the ASVAB, and what I wanted was I wanted to be in my friend's shop, because I already knew him and he introduced me to all of the people in his shop and everything. And I was like, I want to be here where I've already met people and I already know people. And they're like, well, you scored a little too high. Yeah, they're like, you scored a little too high on the ASVAB to be in that shop. And I'm like, are you saying that they're stupid? Because that's not cool.
I'm too smart for them? What?
They're like, no, typically, like, you score between a 90 and a 95 to be, they were H, which is, what the heck does it stand for? It's aircraft ground equipment. So ladders, scaffolding, and the lights for, night missions and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The big spotlights that they would have out on the flight line.
Sure.
And there was also no positions available in age, because the way Air National Guard works is that you kind of get to pick your job, but at the same time, it's more of like what's available. And that's kind of how rank structure works too, is like you only get promoted if there's like an available spot for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they gave me a list of everything that I scored high enough for, and I decided to go with avionics. And avionics, the one that I chose was communications, navigation, and mission systems.
Okay.
So anything that had to do with radios, GPS, and satellite navigation, and anything like forward-looking infrared or radar cards, any type of like radar equipment, I worked on that as well.
So I actually
And
had
so,
I had another friend who he was a Navy guy, and he did the same sort
mhm.
of thing, and I learned a lot from him. I worked with him, and I learned a lot about that kind of the wild side of the technical aspect of things, and how kind of busy it can feel. You know, like it just your go 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 kind of thing.
Yes, yes. So like in the Air Force, different bases have what's called an ops tempo.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it's an operations tempo. It's how busy the base is, how often they fly missions, and that kind of dictates how many people are needed in a shop and in a squadron, that kind of thing. So um, my base at Moffett Federal Airfield was a combat search and rescue base, so we call
Okay.
that CSAR. um, so we had 5 HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters, and no, scratch that. We had 4 HH-60 helicopters and 5 MC-130Ps. So um,
I
I
like to
knew going
scratch
into
that.
it,
That was a nice little lingo
I
in
switched it. Yeah.
there.
uh, but because it was an Air National Guard base and it wasn't really big enough and didn't really have a high enough ops tempo to have dedicated shops for the C-130s versus the helicopters, we were required to be fully qualified on both airframes. So I had some like drill weekends that I went to before I shipped out, because I enlisted in December 9th, 2009. And I didn't ship out for basic until March of 2010. So I had a few months where I went down to the base for drill weekends, and they kind of prepped me for what I could encounter during basic and what I would be learning during tech school. And they taught me the basics like rank structure, what the enlisted ranks are, what they're called, and officer ranks and what they're called, and how all of that works, and how um, basically like how you would address superiors versus like an enlisted superior versus an officer superior, how to salute, all that stuff. So
Military
I kind of,
101.
yeah, basically. And it kind of gave me a leg up on everybody else. So there's I went to basic already kind of knowing what to expect, because
Mm-hmm.
they had prepared me for it. um so I had basic at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And my first, we got on the bus, and we get to the base, and none of us are allowed to get off the bus. They said nobody's allowed to get off the bus until they tell you. And in the Air Force, instead of drill sergeants, we have military training instructors, or MTIs. So, and we call them TIs for short.
Okay.
So a bunch of TIs get on the bus and just start screaming at us. And this is at like midnight, 11 o'clock midnight. And they just start screaming at us to get our shit and get off the bus. And they're like, we don't care whose shit you grab, just grab shit and get off the fucking bus.
Get going.
Yeah. And like the rest of that night is kind of a blur, because you immediately go into autopilot.
Yeah.
You're just like, you have to take direction. You're not being paid to think right now. You're being
Right.
paid to move.
Yeah. It's like a coping mechanism. You're
Um,
just like shut down and go.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. The only other thing I remember from that night is that one of the girls that was on the bus with me, that was in my flight, she ended up having a breakdown,
Oh no.
and she started crying. And she got pulled off to the side by one of the female TIs, and she was kind of like, the female TI looked at her and said, either you're gonna pull through this or you're gonna dip out. Which is it? Like, you have a
Yeah.
choice to make, and you need to make it now. And she, like, the girl that was crying, she was upset because she'd left her daughter to go into boot camp and stuff like that, and she didn't realize, like, it was kind of a shock. She was
Mm.
in shock a little bit, and all she could think about was her daughter in that moment. And when she started crying, she's like, "I just wanna see my daughter." And the female TI pulled her off to the side and, was like, "Make your choice, like, is this what your daughter would want?" And she kinda, like, she steeled herself and sniffed really big, and she's like, "I'm gonna do this."
Well,
So,
good
it
for
was,
her.
you
But
know
before we move off of that topic, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so feel free to tell me to fuck off with this question
No
if you'd
problem.
like. But do you feel like, and maybe for any of the other veterans that are in the chat, do you feel like there is some strategic lying when it comes to getting people to sign the papers to get them in the door, or do you think they're upfront and truthful right from the beginning, or is some kind of mix of both?
It's I think it for from my personal experience, I would say it's a mix of both. There is a little bit, like, I was very upfront and honest with my recruiter about my family history, and that, I have been on medication in the past, antidepressants and stuff like that, so I disclosed all of that to my recruiter, and he said, "Don't tell anybody else."
Mm.
And he's like, "Do you feel like you can handle," he's like, "You've seen a little bit and you've been talked to a little bit about what you're gonna go through boot camp. Do you think you can handle this?" And I said, "Yeah, it's no problem." And the thing that steeled me, or, gave me the resolve to get through basic, is, I told my dad that I was joining the Air Force, and he said, "You'll never make it." So I looked at him and I said, "You think so? Well, fucking watch me."
So it was a
And
challenge at that point
yeah,
for just proving it to him.
yeah,
So,
because, you
sorry,
know,
go ahead. Go ahead.
um, like I was gonna say that, because, like, everything I've tried to accomplish in my life, there's always been somebody in the background to go, "You can't do that,"
Hmm.
or "You're not strong enough." And like, I've always kind of given those people the middle finger, like, "No, fuck you. I'm gonna do it just because you said I can't."
Yeah.
So,
Alito actually said that the best motivation is when someone tells you you can't do something.
exactly.
I actually had a very supportive upbringing, so I didn't experience that until I made it to my professional careers,
Mhm.
or career, I guess. And so I don't think I responded quite in the same way as other people who have dealt with it throughout. But I definitely see where it's coming from. You know, somebody tells you you can't do that, and you're like, well, can I? Can I not? And then you're just like, fuck it, I'm gonna get it done. You know, I'm gonna
Yeah.
show them. I'm gonna show them what I'm made of.
Yeah.
Vonlet said that he thinks that they don't lie, but he says everything's sugar coated, and that might be the best way to kind of phrase it,
Yeah.
where there's no outright mistruths or anything like that, but they're trying to get you to
No.
sign the paper, right?
Definitely
They
not.
want
Yeah.
you in,
Like,
right?
What is that shit?
when I enlisted, because I was Air National Guard at the time, they had enlistment bonuses. So they said, if you enlist, you'll get a $30,000
shit?
enlistment bonus. What they didn't tell me when I signed on is that I would get the first half of my enlistment bonus when I graduated from tech school and when I got to my duty station, and I wouldn't get the second half of the enlistment bonus until I was halfway through my enlistment.
Okay,
So
so
they didn't tell me that until, I was actually sitting down and asking, when do I get my enlistment bonus? And this was after I graduated tech school and everything. So I
it's like,
definitely think sugar coated is a good way of putting it, because they were like, "Oh, here you go, $30,000 enlistment bonus, but we're not going to tell you that you only get half."
all right.
And there's prerequisites that you have to meet in order to get the full enlistment bonus.
So it's like there's strings attached, but you have no recourse to complain about the strings
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they kind of own your ass after you sign the paper, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And somebody else did say that, like, when I disclosed, the antidepressants and stuff to my recruiter, he told me not to tell anybody else, because I would have had to undergo a psych eval
mm,
and obtain a waiver in order to enlist. And he said, "I know that you're kind of facing a tough living situation where it's either enlist or be homeless." And he's like, "Don't tell anybody else unless you want to be homeless until you get a waiver."
interesting.
So, um,
That's an interesting backstory.
yeah.
So we kind of talked about the decision to serve your country. It sounds
Mhm.
like it wasn't really a decision necessarily more of a kind of forced decision, I guess. You kind of had your option
Yeah.
was homeless or serve. So I mean, it seems like it was a good decision so far with the options you were presented.
Yeah. Yeah. It was my thinking was, it took a lot of control away from, me having control over my own destiny,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of had proved to myself since moving out of my parents' house and trying to be an adult at 18 and 19 that I really wasn't prepared to be an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I said I kind of need structure, and I need something that's going to take some of that control away from me so that I can kind of have an easier transition into adulthood.
Right.
And what I didn't realize is how much control was going to be taken away from me, and how hard it would be once I was done with all of my tech school and stuff like that, because I wasn't active duty. So as soon as I finished tech school, I kind of went back to being a part-time civilian, part-time military.
Yeah.
Um, but transitioning back from tech school to a traditional guardsman was still difficult because, I was gonna say the very first morning I woke up at Lackland, a whole slew of TIs came rushing in to wake everybody up, and they were, screaming and yelling, and we were told to stand in front of these big lockers that we had where we would keep our uniforms, and we had one drawer that locked, so we had, a key on a chain that we
Mm-hmm.
would wear for all of our important stuff like money and debit cards, cell phones, that kind of thing. And I had ended up sleeping in a bed that was towards the front of the door. So when all of the TIs came in, like my bed was kind of at the beginning of the barracks. So all of the TIs passed me first before they yelled at everybody else. So I'm standing in front of my footlocker, and I have a TI on this side, a TI on this side, both screaming and spitting.
Uh,
And then all of a sudden, this wily TI comes in, and he climbs on top of the footlocker and is hanging down, screaming at me, spitting on my forehead. And like at that moment, I was staring forward, and it took every ounce of energy I had not to laugh my ass off.
yeah. And,
Because it was just so over the top
yeah.
ridiculous. I didn't even care that I was getting screamed at. It was just
Right.
so funny.
It seems like that's almost part of the procedure is to be so outrageous that you can check any emotion no matter how outrageous it is, so that like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
on the front lines and you see something that's outrageous, you can check it and move on with the mission. It seems like that's
Mhm.
kind of the purpose that I'm getting just from what I've talked to folks about. It's almost
Yeah.
so over the
Yeah.
top that you're like, well, I only have one reaction to this, and that's to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically. And I I tried to be a wallflower, but my last name is very Polish. Um and every other letter is a vowel, and it ends in CZ.
So none of them
So
could do it.
yeah, so nobody could say my last name,
Uh,
and you have to earn the right to be called an airman. So until you graduate from basic, you're called a trainee.
mhm.
So they called me trainee alphabet because they're like, we're not gonna fucking bother with your name because you're not worth knowing your name. Like you're just a
Yeah,
trainee.
right.
And so I was trainee alphabet for a really long time. Um, and that was kind of like I was told that there were some people that like wouldn't be able to hack it in basic.
Mhm.
And that definitely did happen. I did see a couple further, further on down the line, I did see a couple more mental breakdowns where one girl, she washed out and she ended up separating because she mentally didn't have the fortitude to handle boot camp. And there was another girl who had I want to say a momentary lapse in judgment.
Mhm.
And she decided when our TI screamed at her that she was going to scream back at him.
Probably not the correct decision.
So she got washed back, or in the Air Force, we called it recycled. She got recycled for 2 weeks, but then she went on to graduate. So, and I did see her when I was in tech school. So I was really happy to see that.
Yeah.
Um, but really, it was,
What is
I
that
think your
shit?
friend Philip kind of touched on it a little bit that, like, when you're in boot camp, like, he was in a band flight, I wasn't in a band flight. So, In the mornings we do PT, and PT like every other day was running, and running consisted of, sometimes it was paced running, sometimes it was free running, sometimes it was sprints where you'd sprint for 1 minute and then kind of jog for 1 minute, and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. And then every other day besides that was strength training, so push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, that kind of thing. And you get into a routine where like you really don't have to think, you
Mhm.
just go on autopilot. And there were plenty of times where like I'd wake up, get into formation, and then everything is a blur and I don't remember anything, and I wake up again at breakfast or at lunch,
And just
or
do it again.
I just, and there were times where I'd fall asleep while marching, and we'd be
Wow.
marching somewhere and it'd be the ass crack of dawn or oh dark 30, and uh, like I would just sleep march to wherever we were going, because you don't need your brain. You take orders and you
Right.
do what you're told and
And,
what you're trained to do, and
and the body
that's
just
it.
does it. You
Yeah,
just go.
yeah, yeah. And
Um,
so, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just gonna see where you wanted to go from here. So the next question I have, in general, is deployment. Were you ever deployed? Did you go to active duty anywhere from your reserve station, or did you complete your service as a reservist?
So, my base, because it was combat search and rescue,
Hmm.
the places that we deployed to were kind of central, but not really in the thick of things. So I've been to Djibouti, Africa, in the Horn
Djibouti.
of Africa. Yeah, Djibouti. um,
You got to
my base
giggle at that.
also, yeah, my base also did deploy to Bagram in Afghanistan. I think it's in Afghanistan. I don't remember. Um, but much like Philip, where like I was avionics and I worked on the combat search and rescue helicopters, so like we were only called in when somebody needed to get picked up, or
Right.
somebody needed that meta flight thing. And
Sure.
uh, it does. I have known people. There's a buddy of mine from high school that had to get life flighted because he was hit by an IED, and he did get medevaced, but by the time they got him to DC to have the surgery that he needed, he was gone. And so, like, I have a couple other friends from high school that were also in the Marines with him. Um, and every year they always post something on Facebook in remembrance of him.
Yeah.
And it's a reality, and that's really the only super close to home thing that's happened to me, or in my general vicinity.
Mm.
Um, as a traditional guardsman, it was much more common to lose chiefs, E7s and E8s, senior master sergeants and chief master sergeants to retirement. We lost some pilots because helicopters would malfunction and that kind of thing, but um, it really wasn't a common thing in the Air National Guard. And the other thing was too is that all deployments were voluntary.
Mm.
So that was one perk of not being active duty. That like if it wasn't absolutely necessary to deploy, you didn't have to.
Right.
So
Kind of a different, call it a different take on the voluntary versus this is your job now and you go.
yeah,
The voluntary, I mean, it's still amazing. If anything, it may even be a little bit more amazing that you volunteer to go when you know
hmm,
how bad it can be. But
yeah,
it's just a different take on it. It's
yeah,
being told to go versus.
yeah. And I mean, there's plenty of things that happened while I was in the service that were really difficult to navigate, but none of them were deployment related. And
Mm,
so I think that I'm really lucky in that regard.
absolutely.
Um, so
And I for one am thankful for that. It's, it's never fun to have trying things happen to people.
yeah,
Especially if it doesn't have to happen. So.
yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about with deployment? Any funny stories or interesting stories or
I
thoughts?
mean, um, No, not really. I mean, as far as like Djibouti was concerned, like most of the time we had normal like 8-hour work days, and then like on our off days we would go play softball.
Yeah,
So like it wasn't anything that was difficult or harrowing. But it, it's still there's still the attitude of like we have a really serious mission here. Combat search and rescue is not something to be taken
right,
lightly.
right.
So everybody treated the job with the respect that it deserved, and we all did our jobs to the best of our ability anytime we needed to. So
That's awesome. Okay. Since you've been, well, I guess post deployment, did you remain in the service? Did you come back and continue out a period of time, or was it wrapped up?
So I had my son in 2011. Um, and there was a really big part of me that like my entire life changed. I was only 22 when I had
Mm,
my son. So I was really young, and my priorities changed. And I was like, I have a family. I got married. I had my son, and I was like, my priorities have changed. And I met my ex-husband when we were in tech school together. The first part of my tech school was at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, in Biloxi, like Philip was at
mm.
Keesler. And I remember talking to the ATC guys, so I know exactly where he was at.
Yeah.
Um, and then the second part of my tech school was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, right on the border of Oklahoma.
Gotcha.
Um, so I met my ex-husband while we were at Shepherd, and then he was stationed at Beale Air Force Base, which is in Northern California. At the time, I was living near Sacramento, and Beale Air Force Base is only about 35 minutes from where I lived. So after I met my ex-husband and found out he was stationed at Beale, we got a little bit closer and ended up getting married and having a kid. And I said, because my husband at the time is active duty Air Force, he has the same job that I do, and that kind of thing. We're kind of taken care of, and my priorities have kind of changed.
Mm,
And because we lived near Beale Air Force Base, because he was active duty and I was only guard, I had to drive 3.5 hours
jeez.
one way to get to my base. And
Ugh.
my base is in the Bay Area, and Bay Area is incredibly expensive to live.
Mm,
So I was like, "There's no way I'm moving here." And my at the time husband couldn't move there because he was active duty stationed at Beale. He needed to be nearby.
right.
So I did petition and I asked for, there is a clause in the military that if you're a female and you have a child or you develop a family, that you can request voluntary separation. Um, Mine was vehemently denied several times.
It's
And yeah,
it's kind of wild.
um, yeah, a little bit. And then came time for promotions where um, they, at the time I was an E3, which is a senior airman. No, 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 airman first class. And the promotions were to senior airman. And so there was a bunch of people that enlisted around the same time that I did, and we were all kind of spread out throughout tech school together. And most of them, except for me and a couple others, got promoted to E4, which is senior airman. And I was told that at the time when promotions came around, I was pregnant.
Mm,
So I was exempt from PT examinations. And they're like, well, you'll just have to wait until you have the kid and then take a PT exam. And I said, wait, that's not how that works. And I was like, just because I'm currently exempt from PT examinations, like I'm like still eligible for promotion, you can take the exemption into account. But because I was female and I was the only female in the shop, they didn't know how things worked and they weren't willing to figure out how things worked.
that's
So,
that's too
I,
bad to hear that.
yeah,
It's kind of a bad experience with that one, but
yeah. And as a female in the military and as a female, like the sole female in my shop for a really long time, there was a bunch of other really, really negative things that I dealt with that kind of left me disenfranchised and made me really jaded. Um, but that was kind of like the start of everything of like, yeah, we know that you've volunteered for this and that you signed up for this, but we don't really care to make it worth your while.
mm,
And so it was really unfortunate, but I didn't get promoted. And because I didn't get promoted, I lost the second half of my enlistment bonus
Oh,
and didn't
Jesus.
get it. And then a year later, no, a year later, I hurt myself. I got injured. And because I was avionics, some of the things that we worked on the helicopters, we called it the hell hole, where it's this really, really small space in the tail of the helicopter where
Yeah.
bigger guys wouldn't be able to fit. Like
Yeah.
there's no way that they'd be able to get their arms in there to unscrew screws and undo fasteners and stuff like that.
Sure.
So again, me being female, and I was tiny and I'm a little bit shorter and slender and all that stuff. They were like, "Here, you go in
You do
there,
this.
you do this." And so I ended up injuring my shoulder
Oh,
because of how
jeez.
often they would have me in there in really awkward positions trying to screw things in and unscrew things, like just the motion of my
Yeah.
arm and stuff like that. It ended up screwing up the I got tendonitis. And then I saw the military doctors on base and they said it was a rotator cuff injury. So they sent me to physical therapy. And what ended up happening is that the way the tendons are set up in the shoulder is that they're really close together.
Hmm.
And when they're inflamed, they rub against each other and cause atrophy. So, me being in physical therapy actually made it worse.
Yeah. More
And
activity on it.
yeah, so it ended up that my tendons are so atrophied that I only have about 15% usage in my arm
Wow.
now. And I had to be able, like, this is over the next couple years because I didn't get discharged until 2014. Um, Over the next couple years, it was doctors, specialists, MRIs, CAT scans, X-rays, all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff to try to figure out what was going on with my shoulder. And at the end of it all, they said, you're lifting one toolbox away from ripping the tendons in your arm and never being able to use your arm again. And so, because I wasn't fit for duty, um, they medically discharged me.
Wow.
So, without ever being promoted, 5 years in the service as an E3.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
not a very rosy take of the story, I guess. It's kind of
No. And don't get me wrong, like joining the military is probably one of the better decisions I've ever made. It definitely was. Um, Boot camp especially was a very like interesting experience for lack of a better word. Um, I enjoyed it, honestly. Like being able to go on autopilot and just do what I'm told and not have to think about anything, not have to
right.
worry about anything. I didn't even care that, they were meticulous about how we had to make our beds and do hospital corners and fold our socks and shit like that. Like
Yeah.
that didn't matter to me. It was that like I had no cares in the world. I had no
Right.
worries,
Right.
you know.
It's almost like
So,
the ease of motion when somebody else is making the important decisions for you. It gets a little
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So, although, much of my experience in the military and it does get worse than that, but I don't know if you want to talk about that stuff at all.
Well, I mean,
Um,
these interviews are for the vets to speak their piece, so we can talk about whatever you want. It's up to you. My next
yeah,
question is going to be post service related, so if you want to stay on the topic, then by all
sure.
means.
I think that I have a different perspective, because Philip and Who, they're both male, and myself being female, it's a completely different perspective to the experience of being in the service. And while my experience of being in the service wasn't nearly as harrowing as Who's experience, and I'm incredibly lucky that I didn't have to go through those things, and he is a far braver man than I. Um, there were things that I went through um, as a female in the military that not a lot of females in the military get to talk about. Um, who highlighted the stigma. And there's a stigma with female airmen, female servicemen that like if they speak up, there will be repercussions. And it was actually right when I graduated from tech school, I came to my base for on-the-job training, and one of the supervisors, one of the shop chiefs there, had a party on base for a bunch of the servicemen and stuff too. I don't remember what the party was for, but he had a barbecue and a bunch of people were there. And I got there, and I'm meeting everybody, and I didn't really know anybody. I was new to the base, and this one guy came up to me and he said, "Can I get you a drink? Can I get you anything?" And he introduced himself. For the life of me, can't remember his name. But he got me a drink, and the drink was really, really strong. It was more alcohol than anything else. And I finished the drink because I didn't want to be rude. And immediately when I finished my drink, he offered to get me another one. And I said, "I'm good, dude. Like, I can get my own drink. Like, it's okay." He's like, No, I'll get you a drink." And he left and got me another drink. And it was the same thing. It was mostly alcohol. I was being wary because I'm fresh out of tech school. So a lot of the training they give us is how to understand the warning signs of things like being drugged, being date raped, and, suicide awareness. I was fresh out of tech school. So all of that training was fresh in my mind. So like, I paid attention, but I went up to the guy who was throwing the party, and I let him know, like, "Hey, this guy's making me drinks, and they happen to be really, really strong, and I don't want to be rude and not take the drink." So he said, "Give me the drink." He took the drink and he poured it out. And this guy noticed, the guy that was getting me the drinks, he noticed I didn't have a drink anymore. So he's like, "Oh, you don't have a drink anymore. Let me go get you another one."
So it's an endless cycle. It almost sounds like, and not to like belittle it or anything, but it almost sounds like frat parties. Like that kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
situation where it's just out of control,
Yeah.
kind of.
And the third drink that he got me, I got 2 sips in, and I knew it was different. And I was like, I've only really had one drink because I didn't have too much of the second one. I was like, I'm getting far too drunk for only having 1 cup of whatever it was that he gave me, because I think it was some type of like liqueur in soda. So I went up to the guy who was throwing the party and I said, "I think I need to get a taxi back to my hotel. I'm not comfortable here anymore." And he said, "Okay." And I did go back to my hotel, and I was fine. Nothing happened. But up to that point, I never had a hangover. I've always been pretty smart. Drink a glass of water, take some Tylenol before going to bed, especially if you're going to be drinking heavily. I did the same thing that night, had a glass of water, took some Tylenol before I went to bed. But the next morning I woke up and I was really, really sick. Like, the worst hangover I've ever had, and I've never had anything like it since. So,
little something extra in that one, you think?
yeah. So I did actually report it, because I was like, if it was somebody else, I would want, I want to lead by example. And like, if something happens, us as females need to feel comfortable enough to report it and to speak up for the ones who aren't strong enough to speak up for themselves. And they took my report, and this was at the SARC office at the time. Now it's called SAPR, but SARC is Sexual Assault Reporting Center. Now it's a Sexual Assault Prevention and Reporting Office. But I reported it, and they took the name of who I was reporting it against, and they said, "Oh, he's about to leave for officer school to be a pilot. He's not going to be a problem anymore." And they shuffled me out the door.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get this too negative about the service. We're trying to be. I mean, obviously, your story, it's very very important. But
And the thing is that my story is not unique.
Yeah.
And that's not to
That's
say
the
that
problem.
the entire it's not to say that the entire military is like that, because it definitely isn't. But that situation kind of like said to me that, like, these people are not your friends.
Right.
and I, would show up, do my job, and I'd go home.
Yeah.
Like,
And
that was it.
not engage with anybody on free time kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sweep, yeah.
So,
Dark said, "Sweep it under the rug." That's exactly the right phrase for what happened. Just
yeah, yeah,
well, and the worst, almost the worst part there is promoting them out of, going to be a pilot, because, that doesn't show very good judgment to me. But, and it's a pretty messed up situation.
yeah. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only time it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time it happened, it was I'll, I don't really want to go over the story, but like basically it was the same thing where like I was taken advantage of, not in a super serious way, but my privacy was invaded and I felt taken advantage of. So I was like, no, I'm going to report it because this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what they did was, in the Air National Guard, they have, um, like they have active duty positions, but they're
Mm-hmm.
different from full-time positions. So full-time technicians are paid on a civilian scale, whereas active guard reserve or AGR positions are considered active duty military. So what they did is the person that did this, he did lose a stripe, but then he was offered an AGR position. And they covered it up as, oh, you need to be an E6 to get the AGR position, but you're an E7. So if you take the stripe loss, you can have the AGR position. And then they just kind of like, they didn't sweep it under the rug, but it just felt very like, I don't know,
The
it
wrong
felt,
message for sure.
yeah,
That's
it felt very backhanded to me. Like, yes, he
yeah,
lost a stripe, but he also got promoted.
yeah.
So like,
That's
yeah,
that's that's fucked up. And Tom says,
yeah.
kick the can down the road. Unfortunately, kicking the can down the road implies that someone will do something about it eventually. But it kind of sounds like that's not necessarily. I know things have changed a little bit probably in more
Yeah,
recent
yeah,
years, but it's still, from what I've heard, not great.
yeah. But one thing that my service did like inspire in me is again that fight response of like, I'm being told I can't do something, well, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to turn around and do it anyway. So I got involved with the SARC office and I said I want to be involved and know how I can help other victims and, what can I do to be a part of this? And so I was actually brought on as a victims advocate. So that basically meant that like I would be a support system for people who were reporting sexual assault, up to the point where if it was necessary, I could testify on behalf of victims in court. Thankfully, I didn't ever have to do that. I never had to set foot in a courtroom, but it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely like a very rewarding experience for me to turn around and say, look, this shit has happened to me too. You're not alone. And
Mm-hmm.
even though it may seem like the system is stacked against you, you at least have one person in your corner. And so that's kind of followed me, um, into like my civilian life as well.
Well, good on you for, I guess, call it taking a stand. I don't really know the best way to convey that, but you know, being the better person in a questionable environment, maybe. I don't,
Yeah.
there's, yeah, it's
Yeah. And like I said, I can't speak on behalf of the entire military, and
yeah,
this is just my personal experience, but it is something that is not unique.
yeah. It's a challenge with the co-ed environment of armed services, the way that the way that they're doing it. It's there are bad people in this world, and there are bad service members.
Yes.
There are bad
Yeah.
veterans. That doesn't mean that everybody, or even a significant number of them, but they are there.
Yes.
That are looking
Absolutely.
to take advantage of people whenever they can, or
Mhm.
and it kind of rubs you the wrong way that that there are enough people willing to look the other way or turn a blind eye to such uncomfortable things,
Yeah.
you know?
I can't see names, but whoever said there's bad actors on every stage is very correct.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, you want to move off of deployment and service, or?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. It seems like every veteran has had difficulty with transitioning from service in whatever capacity to civilian life, sometimes due to the change in structure, change in environment, change in just maybe tempo.
Hmm.
Have you had any of those kind of experiences? How has your life been since you've been discharged? How has it changed?
Well, I think who highlighted that like they kind of give you a plan for transitioning back to
Mhm.
civilian life. I didn't get any of that. I don't know if the guard does it, but I didn't get it. It was basically just like, hey, you're being discharged. Come down to the base, turn in your common access card, and we got to take the rank and stuff off of your uniforms and that kind of thing. And then all of your paperwork and stuff will ship it to you. And that was it. And I signed papers, and then I was
There's the
gone.
door.
Yeah, pretty
See
much.
yourself
And
out.
yeah, and I
Oof.
think I don't know if that's standard practice for the guard, but I think that like it's not as difficult because I was a traditional guardsman, so I only went down to my base 1 week in a month,
Mhm.
and it wasn't an everyday thing for me.
Yeah.
However, like I still was left with like, okay, what do I do now? Like,
Mhm.
where do I go? Because it was always something that I could fall back on. Like, yeah, I'm enlisted. Like, that's something I can count on for at least the next 6 years. And then a year early, I'm like kicked to the curb, for whatever reason, no matter whether it's medical discharge or whatever. It's kind of like, okay, I'm at a fork in the road,
Yeah.
and which way do I go?
I'd be
So,
curious to speak with other guardsmen to know if that's, is it like a volume problem where there's turnover and you can only do it on 1 week in a month or whatever the situation is, and
mhm.
it's like a not necessarily a like a targeted or mean spirited thing, but it's a
Yeah,
procedure that
yeah.
has to get done, and they can only
I'd,
do
I'd
it
be
this
interested.
time.
I'd
Yeah.
be interested to know as well because, like, even though like I was only in E3, I'd still been in for 5 years.
Right.
And I enlisted December 9th, 2009, and I was discharged December 10th, 2014. So literally the day after the 5-year anniversary of my enlistment, like I
Yeah.
was discharged. And like I don't know if it was because I was an E3 or because it was a medical discharge or whatever. um maybe they just didn't have the procedure, or maybe like I don't know. But
Yeah.
my personal experience was that like I wasn't really given any resources or support in choosing a direction going forward.
There's just a finality to it, and it just sort of
Yeah.
stopped.
Yeah. And that finality hit me after everything that like I experienced while in the service. Like I was very disenfranchised, and I was very jaded, and I
Mhm.
was very distrustful of the service, and I spent a lot of time complaining about being in, and like, I can't wait to get out. I can't wait to be done with this. And then when it finally came to that point, I was just like, "Oh my god, I'm out. I'm done
Mhm.
with this. Like, what do I do?"
Right.
And um I was really, really good at my job. A lot of my job consisted of I remember, the first time I was given free reign to do a job solo. Um, it was on TACAN, which is Tactical Air Navigation, and uh, every system that's in the helicopter has a self test feature, and the system itself was working just fine. But when we would do the self test feature, the radar altimeter was supposed to slew to 270 degrees, and it wasn't doing that. But every other part of the system was working just fine. So they wanted to know why. Hang on.
Sure. Little tactical intermission there.
Sorry. Tom's taking my fan.
He's sweating to death over there.
No, his mom is.
Oh.
I don't get a fan. The dirty American doesn't get a fan. Anyway,
that's hilarious.
so I'm doing the self-test for this thing, and the radar altimeter doesn't slew to 270, but the system works perfectly fine.
Mm.
And I was like, my supervisor, Sergeant Gomez, he looked at me and he said, "Find out why the self-test isn't working." And that was it.
Yeah.
He was like, "Here you
Figure
go.
it out."
Here's the TO. TO is technical order. It's basically our manual for troubleshooting systems and stuff like that. He's like, "Here's the TO. Go find out why the self-test isn't working." So we had like a standard procedure, like, okay, the radar altimeter isn't slewing to 270. Let's replace the radar altimeter. Okay, that didn't work. Let's replace the control panel for TACAN. Maybe it's the self-test, like telling the radar altimeter to slew that's not working. So we replace the control panel. Okay, that didn't work. Let's replace the receiver. Maybe the radar, signal that's coming in to the receiver isn't working. Nope, that didn't fix it either. Maybe it's the receiver mount that isn't working.
Sure.
And it's causing a short somewhere with the receiver, and we replace that one. Nope, that didn't fix it either. So now I have to sit down with TOs and I have to trace every single wire that goes from the receiver to the control panel to the radar altimeter. And what ended up happening was that because we were combat search and rescue, the helicopters had mounts for 50 caliber weapons.
Uh-huh.
And they would regularly do test missions and test flights where they would test the weapons and shoot blanks, and sometimes they would shoot live just to make sure the weapons were in good working order as well. So what had happened during one of these tests, the vibration from the 50 caliber weapons had crimped a wire that was in the wall of the helicopter.
That's crazy.
So yeah, like that was very indicative of what I had to do for my job.
And that one little thing caused all of that trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's like troubleshooting nightmare is what that sounds like. Yeah,
and like I would print out the wiring diagrams from the TOs, and the wiring diagrams would span across like 3-4 tables long, and I would sit there with a red pencil tracing every wire where it went, and finally figured out I used an oscilloscope, which is actually something that attaches to a wire, and it kind of like gives you a 2D image of the wire itself and the conductivity on the wire, and it'll tell you exactly where the fault in the wire is. So I used an oscilloscope and shot it down the wire and figured out where the problem was, and it was actually right underneath the mount for the 50 caliber weapons in the wall of the helicopter.
Wow.
So that stuck with me just because it was so off the wall. Like that didn't happen often at all. And that was the first time I'd ever solo troubleshooted a system on the helicopter. So that kind of stuck with me.
It was only the most pain in the ass thing you ever done.
Exactly. But that was very indicative of like the types of things that I would do as avionics for ComNav, and I was very good at my job, and I enjoyed it to a degree. And I thought about like if I do this in the civilian sector, like I could make really good money working on civilian aircraft. I could make up to 6 figures a year, and like by the time I got out of the military, I was divorced. And so it was just me and my son, and I said, I want to give my son a good life, but is this really what I want to do? And so I kind of had to weigh, like, the military was something I knew, something I could fall back on, something that was reliable. I'd already been trained to do the job. I just needed the FAA license to work on civilian aircraft. And I was like, or, like my experience being a victims advocate was really rewarding. And I found that I kind of had an aptitude for being an emotional support for people. And I was like, or, I could go back to school for psychology and be a therapist or something, and work with trauma victims and trauma survivors. I was like, but I need a master's degree if I want to be a therapist. So it was like, go back to school for a year and get my FAA license and be, a civilian contractor, make 6 figures a year, or go back to school for 6 years, get my master's degree, and get spend another year getting licensed, spend 2 more years getting, all the related work experience that I need in order to be a therapist.
Yeah.
And like,
Work for 4
I was like,
years and
okay,
retire.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, okay, job that like I don't particularly care for, but I know I'm good at, or a job that, can be mentally and emotionally taxing, but will be infinitely more rewarding.
Sure.
So, um, uh, I think for you, because you know me, Moppy, that it's kind of self-explanatory that I took the harder road.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That seems
and
to be standard operating procedures for you.
yeah, kind of. Um, I have continued to stay involved with the mental health community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have had jobs working as an educator for a youth center for youth in crisis. I have been um, I've been a 911 dispatcher. You know, I worked, there was a website way back in the day, and I can't remember the name of it, but you basically worked freelance as somebody who was like an emotional support for anonymous people. So like people would go onto this website anonymously and would talk about things like suicide and self-harm and mental and emotional struggles. And I was one of the people that they could come and talk to get mental and emotional support.
Yeah.
Um, and I actually still have quite a few friends from that website that I was like, hey, listen, if you ever, need somebody, in the long term that you can count on, like, here's my email. And I kind of worked my way up with a couple of the people, like, here's my email, you can email me if you need to. And then after a while I'd be like, okay, you know here's my Facebook, you can message me on Facebook, or here's my Instagram and you can message me on Instagram, or here's my Twitter, you can DM me on Twitter. So I actually have quite a few friends that I made that way.
Sounds kind of emotionally taxing in some ways.
It
That's
can
that's.
be, yeah.
I mean, some people are built for it, but that sounds like a lot of. As a mostly introvert myself, that sounds like a lot.
Well,
But good,
I
good for you
consider myself
for.
to be introverted too, so
Yeah, I've never actually taken one of those tests, but I probably should do that just to see if I'm officially one. But um, but good on you for kind of following your dream, as it were. To kind of
yeah,
help those that need it.
yeah.
I guess the next question I have, if you're ready for it.
Hmm.
Sure. Let's see. What is one thing that you wish the public knew about veterans, or how maybe treated you differently, or something along those lines?
I think that the one thing I would like people to know is that, like, who did highlight how much of an invaluable resource the VA is.
Mm,
But what I think a lot of people don't see behind the curtain, as it were, is that the VA is not an easy um, agency to work with sometimes.
mm,
Some of the hoops that you have to jump through as a veteran in order to get benefits, it's there are the hoops are put there by bureaucracy.
mm,
So like I am still in the process of fighting with the VA for disability because, one, I was medically discharged. Two, I was in a critical career field. Three, there have been multiple lawsuits against the military for, lack of ear protection and hearing protection, um, especially from when I was in and before I was in. Um, and like every time I've gone to the VA to get, like, hey, I need to get a physical, I need to get a hearing test so that I can prove to you that I'm disabled, they'll schedule me for a hearing test in the middle of rush hour in Sacramento, which is a 45-minute drive for me, in like the middle of the week or something. And it's like, I have a son that goes to school 5 days a week. And it's like, I'm in school full time as well. And I have assignments to do every single day. And you want me to sit in rush hour traffic for 2 hours just to get a hearing test
yeah.
when there are VA facilities so much closer to where I live.
Right.
And it's just not it's not the veterans themselves, and it's not the social workers that work for the VA, and it's not the VA itself that creates these roadblocks for veterans, but it's not always an easy process to go through in order for veterans to get the resources and the help that they need. So a little bit of empathy and compassion goes a long way. Like who said, just be kind.
Yeah.
It costs nothing to be kind.
Right.
So
Yeah, I couldn't agree enough with that. Just being able to just be a human being,
mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
take it one day at a time.
Yeah. Every single person you see on the street is fighting a battle you know nothing about. I mean, you might know something about, but every person
But there's
that you
specifics.
encounter, every person that you encounter has a whole, artist's palette of shit that goes on in their life on a day-to-day basis that nobody could even fathom, because we all can't see the forest for the trees when it's right in front of our face. It's hard to think about. Each individual has an individual experience and how they perceive the world, and what their personal paradigm is so incredibly varied from one person to the next, and you never know what somebody has dealt with, what they've gone through, how they got through it, and how they choose to live their life.
Landy actually mentioned there's a lot of folks who try to work the system in an unfair way, and I think that's kind of we can loop that back around to the earlier conversation about some of your bad experiences in the service. And I'm not trying to make a false equivalency or equate them, but it just kind of reinforces that idea of bad people trying to work the system, or just trying to get more than their fair share, or trying to just kind of play the game in an unfair way, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Anywhere you go, in any job that you have, any business, any field, there's going to be people, there's going to be bad people who will take advantage of loopholes. And if loopholes exist, you can bet that there are people that will capitalize on those loopholes, and being able to navigate through those things. I guess that's a positive I can take away from my military experience, is that now I've experienced how sometimes the system is put in place for the protection of others, but then there are the people who will exploit those resources. And being able to the best way I can describe it is there's a comedian, Christopher Titus. He has a joke where people who have been through shit know that when shit hits the fan, you step to the side of the fan. People who've never been through shit hits the fan and they go, "Oh God, I'm covered in shit."
Right.
And so I think, I guess a positive that I can take away from everything that I've been through in my life, not just my military experience, but everything before that, is that I can stay cool, calm, and collected in high stress situations, despite PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and all the other shit that I deal with, because I know to step to the side of the fan.
Yeah.
So.
That's I mean, that's a good life lesson. Maybe it sucks how you got there in some ways.
Yeah.
But it's it's a pretty important thing to know how to do and know when to do it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a conversation going on about abuse of the VA system and trying to get 100% disability and things like that.
Yeah.
I've obviously never served, but I have heard and seen situations that make you go, it just gives you a bad taste. Like you're just this isn't, maybe it's not my place to say it, but this isn't right. This doesn't feel right.
I have seen a little bit of that as well. When I first started pursuing possibly getting disability through the VA, when I would ask other veterans, like people that I served with or people that were at my shop, I'd be like, how do I navigate this? You've got you've been through this process. What do I do? What do I do? What do I say? And like the biggest thing that people told me is that when I go for my physical, everything is service related.
Mm.
And like I played softball when I was in high school. I was a catcher. I have bad knees. And they said, don't say that. It's service related. And I can't do that.
Right.
Like I actually have my airman's coin sitting right next to me, and it's what they give you when you graduate from basic, to signify that you're an airman. And like the tenets of the Air Force is integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And integrity is something that has always been super important to me. So I can't just walk into a doctor's office and say that my bad knees are because of my service. Like that's not honest, and it's not morally, it's against what I stand for. So like
that's the word that was bouncing around in my head, integrity. And I mean, obviously it's part of the credo in a lot of public service fields, and it should be an outstanding part of everybody's life. You know, I mean, just because it's easy doesn't mean it's right.
Exactly.
And you know, maybe the system should be changed a little bit to help those that actually need it. 100% agree with that. But the fact that there are many, I don't want to say many because I don't know how many there are, but the fact that there are people that abuse the system and have no integrity is, I'll say it. I mean, it's disgusting. You know, that's literally taking it out of the hands of people that need it.
Yeah, and that was kind of what has led to my current battle with the VA, is that like, because I do have other health problems, physical health problems, like I was really active in high school. I played a lot of sports, so I have really bad knees. Like I basically, like my joints all suck. So they're trying to say you can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that like what happened with your shoulder is service related. But like, despite me like presenting MRIs and the dates on the MRIs and stuff, they go back and forth and they say, are you sure about that? Like, are you sure you got this when you were in the service? And it's like, yes, I'm sure.
I feel like that kind of repetitive stress should obviously cause some kind of problem.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like they're fighting the wrong fight sometimes, is what it seems like.
But I do understand that it's like, because there are people who take advantage of the system and they try to get more than they're entitled to, like they have these fail safes and these procedures in place, and this is why there's repeated denials, because it's like, are you sure you're not just trying to take advantage of the situation? And like I think I've proven up to this point, because the first social worker I talked to at the VA, I talked about getting my GI Bill for school. And I don't remember the specifics of it, but basically it boiled down to, because I was guard, I didn't meet the requirements, like the active duty requirements, in order to be entitled to a GI Bill. So I didn't even get a GI Bill.
Jeez.
I got no help for school or anything, but like I took the lick. I was like, you know what? You have told me like why I don't qualify for it. I'm not going to sit here and complain and be upset that I should be entitled to it because I'm a veteran. Like, you've explained to me why I don't qualify for it and why I'm not entitled to it. So I'm not going to,
This is after they took half of your signing bonus too. So
yeah. So
I mean,
but
maybe there's such thing as too much integrity. No, I'm kidding. I think I honestly think there is no such thing as too much integrity, but the system should have integrity for the people it's there to serve as well. So I mean, I would.
I think the most difficult thing for me is that, like, I now have an associate's degree in psychology. I have another associate's degree in social behavioral sciences. And
the connection's kind of breaking up. I don't want to give it a second.
Hang on.
Let's see. Hopefully it's not my end.
Getting a little better?
We still don't have the camera, and you're still kind of. Okay, there we go.
Can you hear me though? Okay.
Yeah, no, we're good now. Good now. We're back.
I had 5,000 ping, no lie. I looked down, you're like, oh, the connection's interrupted. I looked down and it was 5,000 ping. I'm like,
That,
what the fuck?
well, it's safe to say it's not my fault.
Yeah, it was definitely my fault, not yours.
That's good.
Um, Crap, now I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That kind of derailed the conversation there a little bit. We were talking about integrity.
Shit, that doesn't help me. I don't, it's just like, I'm not the kind of person to walk in and say, I'm entitled to all of this because of reasons. Um, and I, you know, you said maybe there's such a thing as too much integrity, but I disagree because
Yeah.
while there are freeloaders and people who take advantage of the system at every level, like the people, the society and the world needs more people like myself and like Tom who can roll with the punches but are honest to a fault and will never compromise on who they are because who they are is wonderful.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I was making a tongue-in-cheek kind of comment there.
Yeah, yeah,
And I said it once, but I do believe that the integrity is a two-way street.
hmm,
We should
yeah,
obviously always be 100% that way, but the system needs to figure itself out so that it can
yeah.
weed out the people that will always be there to
I,
abuse the system.
and I just remembered what I was saying.
Okay.
I was saying that like it's gotten even more difficult for me because I have an associate's degree in psychology. I also have an associate's degree in social and behavioral sciences, and I'm just about done with a bachelor's degree in social work. Um, I should be done next year.
Early
But like,
congratulations.
yeah, I have like 4 more classes to take, and then I need an internship, and then I'll be done. Um, but what my education has given to me is a more technical educational um, look into how people's minds work and how society works, and especially with social work that's centered around services for people and for society and for the good of society and for the greater good, for lack of a better term. um, and it makes it even more difficult for me to navigate situations sometimes because I understand why people do the things that they do and I understand the psychology of it and I can see both sides of the coin. So I think that like I tend to accept situations a lot more often than maybe I should
Yeah,
because I understand the why behind like things that happen.
I can see
And
that.
so I can, kind of write it off or make excuses or rationalize like, okay, I can see why this happened. It
Yeah,
sucks, but I
yeah,
see why.
right.
And then I just accept it from there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's not my place to say this, and maybe maybe I should get chewed out by the vets in stream, but it feels like it needs to be a concerted effort by vets to keep each other honest when it comes to this situation, because people like myself, I've been a lifelong supporter of the military, and
Mhm.
I mean, I have nothing but respect for everyone that serves, even to some degree the ones that fuck the system over a little bit. But it
Mhm.
it needs, me saying something is not where it needs to come from. It needs to be an internal kind of conversation. I'm sure there are
Yeah.
organizations that have the conversation, but maybe it
Yeah.
needs to
And
be a
I
little
think
more formalized.
I think that, there is a sense of comfort and camaraderie, and that comes with trauma as well. It's more meaningful when you hear advice or you have support from somebody who you trust and believe understands what you're going through. So like VFWs are a really great resource for veterans because it's veterans helping veterans, and there are tons of vets helping vets, businesses and stuff where I live. I live right outside of an Air Force base, so and the main VA building for California is 45 minutes away in Sacramento from me, and the biggest VA hospital in California is at Travis Air Force Base, which is an hour and a half away from me. So like there's all kinds of resources available. And I'm sure it's much the same in any place that you live. All you have to do is look.
Yeah.
But sometimes for some vets, looking is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And things like this with charity streams and other veterans speaking up about their experiences. I know my experience isn't necessarily standard or typical to how a lot of other people's are, and definitely not near as traumatic as some veterans have gone through as well. But every experience is valid, and
Mm-hmm.
every feeling is valid. And for a long time, I struggled. I just started contacting the VA and going through, the motions and stuff last year because it took me 6 years for a professional therapist to talk to me and really work with me about like because I refused. I was like, I'm not a disabled veteran. I still have some use of my arm. I still have all four of my appendages. I didn't see combat. I don't deserve benefits.
Right.
There are people out there that deserve it way more than I do. So why would I take benefits away from other veterans that are much more deserving than I am?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that like every experience is valid, and even though I may not have gone through what other veterans have gone through, I'm still a veteran, and that
It's
still means something.
grayscale instead of black and white.
Exactly, and I struggled with that for a really long time, and I think there are a lot of veterans who go through that same thought process as me, that like there's like who kept saying some gave all gave some,
Mm-hmm.
and I was part of that group that gave some, and I felt like I didn't give as much as others had, so I was less deserving. And you know it took a lot of strength and a lot of courage for me to walk into a VA office and say, "Hey, do do I get help?
Mm-hmm.
Can I have any of these things?" Even though I felt like I didn't deserve it. Um, but every experience is valid, and every veteran is valid. Every feeling is valid, no matter how bad or severe or less you think it is. It's still valid.
Yeah. I think that might be the takeaway from because I had the same sort of conversation with Who where actually I don't know if it was in the video. We might have been talking about it beforehand, but how it's actually detrimental to the system as a whole when
Hmm.
veterans think that their service was not enough. You know,
Yeah,
if more of the veterans attempted to engage the system, then maybe more resources would be assigned to help the system as a whole and to help the even help the ones that need it even more.
yeah.
You know,
And I
just more
think that
resources in the pot.
exactly. And I think that there is an overwhelming trend, at least in the United States, throughout history, that like all of the social reforms that have come about in a really strong way, like the riots at Stonewall for LGBT rights and um, the riots during MLK era, and that brought about the ending of Jim Crow laws and segregation. Like all of those came about from really strong personalities that were willing to stand up and fight for what they believed in. But I think the struggle with veterans is that either they're disenfranchised because they're like, look at how much I've done for my country and look at what you're doing for me. And then there's the other side of it where they're so traumatized that like they spend all of their time and energy trying to just navigate being alive after the things that they've been through. And at the end of the day, there might not be enough veterans left with the strength and resolve to stand up and do the things like they did at Stonewall, the things like they did, like Rosa Parks. That I have yet to meet a veteran who has the willingness to, or at least, a big enough group of veterans that have the willingness and the resolve to do things like they did.
Mm.
Because all of us are taught discipline, all of us are taught respect, all of us are taught the right and wrong way to go about things. So, it's really difficult for a veteran to stand up and say, "Hey, maybe we need some social reforms for veterans." And then they turn around and go, "Well, maybe not."
It's almost a
And
comedy in the Greek sense, where it's like a sad a sad situation, a
yeah,
comedy of errors kind of situation where it's
yeah,
the system sets you up to follow the rules, and then it's difficult to work outside of the framework to change
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. And I think that you know, uh, my dad is another example. As much as I don't have a relationship with him, he was in the Navy during the Vietnam War, and he was only in for 5 years. And because it was during active war, he got promoted really quickly.
Mm.
He was stationed in Maryland, and he used to tell me that he couldn't do more than 5 years because he started having nightmares that he was going to go to Vietnam and die. And uh, even then, with my dad serving in Vietnam, it took him until he was almost 70 to go to the VA and ask if he was eligible for benefits. So my dad served from 1965 to 1970, and it took him until 2010 to go to the VA and say, "Hey, am I eligible for benefits?" So like
I
even
feel like
even
if
then,
anybody is, then
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And so
yes.
it's a systemic thing at this point. So
So Tom actually said veterans should be looked after by those they looked after. I respect that.
mhm,
The only problem is that the voices have more weight behind them when when it's an internal voice, if that makes sense.
yeah,
When it's a voice based from knowledge of doing. I will never know what it's like. Some of the feelings you've had, and who and others. Yes, it is almost unconscionable to ask the veterans to continue to do things, but it it's hard not to when they're the
mhm,
ones with the information. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
almost like there's a door between me and the knowledge that you have, and
yeah,
I will never be able to see it unless the door is opened by somebody from the inside. So
yeah,
it needs to be maybe not maybe not a movement entirely from veterans, but it needs to
yeah.
have a core and a weight of veteran voice behind it, I think.
Yeah, so what WHO just said, the VA has, as a whole, gets more funding for every veteran who enrolls in healthcare. You, as a veteran, are helping your fellow veterans to receive better care by signing up for services. And that's kind of what like pushed me
Mm-hmm.
to start that whole process last year. Was that like my therapist is she actually works primarily with military families, and that was how I met her. I was referred by the mental health services at the medical squadron at Beale Air Force Base. And she was the one who told me about that. So like I am aware, like money is being poured into the VA, and it's not about funds, it's about quality. And like the VA does offer quality care, and like the veterans who do get VA services are getting some of the best veteran services that has ever been available for veterans, because it continues to get better as time goes on. But that going in and starting the conversation about, do I get benefits and what services are offered to me, it gets the ball rolling, and it's kind of like a snowball effect. The more veterans stand up and advocate for themselves, um, you know having the courage to advocate for themselves and being able to stand up and say, like, rather than you know taking that slice of humble pie, being able to stand up and say, you know what, I did do this for my country, and
Right.
maybe I do deserve a little bit of something, um, because some gave all gave some. So we all gave, we all put money into the pot when we signed up. Um, so it's not necessarily wrong to say, hey, that's my little slice of the pie over there. No matter
Right.
how small it is, it's still a slice,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Well, that's awesome. I don't know. We talked about your service, some of the
mhm,
pros and cons. We talked about post-service, and we talked a lot about kind of the mental health and the discharge part of things. We got to, both of our previous interviewees were male, and we got to kind of get an insight of, let's go ahead and say, some of the challenges of being a female in the armed service are from your interview. I feel like it was very eye-opening, and we had some really good conversations generated through the chat as well. Do you want to say anything else to the audience, or we?
I just think that like today we took a really, really important step in, not only awareness, but talking about things. Talking about things is so powerful, and it has so much more power than people like to give it credit for. Not just talking about Raid Shadow Legends, but talking about deployments, talking about trauma. It's not easy to talk about things. It's not easy to step up and say, yeah, this horrible shit has happened to me. And especially as a serviceman that has been taught discipline, that has been taught humility, that has been taught to shut up and color, that has been taught to do as you're told when you're told to do it. When they say jump, you say how high, or you just jump and hope that you get high enough. It's definitely a change of pace to step up and talk about things that have been stigmatized the entire time we've been in the service, things that were swept under the rug, things that we were told were not okay to feel, things that were not okay to be. And we had 3 really great examples of people who stepped up and said, this isn't okay, but it's okay to talk about it not being okay. So I think it's really important, and I hope that we can get more exposure, because I've done Wounded Warrior Project charity streams in the past myself, and one of my friends that was in the service, Nicole, she unfortunately couldn't be here for the charity stream, although I did invite her. She is now an ambassador for Wounded Warrior Project, and it's not the only charity that exists for veterans, but it is one of the most well known. And I think that today was just really, really important, and it was important to me to be here. And I thank you, Moppy, for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously my true pleasure to get the opportunity to talk to you guys. I don't know what I expected coming in today, but it has vastly exceeded any of those expectations that I could have had. Just the maybe this isn't entertaining in the same way as a lot of other, even other of our Keith and I's charity streams in the past have been. But I think it's in its own way even more important and powerful to just have a stage as big or small as it may be to have the conversation. So
Agreed.
I'm really thankful for you guys, the veterans that have, well, specifically you, who, and shit.
Philip.
You're listen, my mind was. I'm sorry, Philip. Just
how did I remember his name and you forgot it? Come on, Moppy.
I'm old.
You fucked up before, but
Thursday I turned 36, and it's game over at that point. It's the mind's gone. Sacked. Yeah, like Jesus. Philip, I'm sorry. Well, now I'm going to turn all kinds of shades of red. Moppy's gone downhill. Accurate. I really appreciate you 3, but then just the other veterans of SAID who have been engaging in the chat means a lot to me as well. Everybody has a unique experience throughout the journey of life, but in particular, also the veterans have your mileage may vary. I guess
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
is kind of the takeaway
And
from this.
yeah, and like the other thing is like the time that I was in the service like was a really awkward time where there weren't patches. Um, they phased out patches for a while and they gave out coins, and like the year after I got out, they phased out coins and brought back patches. So like I have a bunch of coins from when I was in that I carry with me at all times. So regardless of what my experience was, like it was very formative, and it's very important to me that I remember the things that I went through and that they weren't all bad, and the things that I take away from it can be positive. And like I have my airman's coin that I carry with me all the time. I have a coin from the 332nd Training Squadron at Keesler. I have a coin from when we were getting trained on a new system on the C-130s, and whoever got the most answers right got a coin. So that was me. I got all the answers right. Another coin from Keesler Air Force Base, the 81st Training Group, all the different squadrons that are there. So like I have a collection of coins that I carry with me to just be that reminder of like, look at all of these things that you've been through and everything that you learned and everything that you can carry with you. And as veterans, we can choose to do the same thing. We can choose to stand up for other veterans as well as ourselves, and we can turn it into a positive and use it as a font of strength for making things better for everybody else going forward.
Awesome. With that note, Raid Shadow Legends, etc.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tom, thank you for
MMORPG.
There you go. Tom, thanks for helping me try and save face there. Valiant effort. We're gonna move on and pretend it didn't happen. Erin, anything else? Any last words? Or are we good to go?
No, we're good to go.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again. We're gonna switch over to BRB screen again for a couple of minutes, and then when we come back, we're gonna have pork ribs to look at
in my belly.
Ooh.
So we'll be back with you guys in just a few minutes. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.